Marianne, for that. I'm so glad that you explained that because, as I said, we went around the country running forums to try and do so to a whole range of different groups within the community, and it's a tough one. It's tough, but when you get right into it, it's actually very rich and very exciting. Thanks to ECA for engaging 89 Degrees East to work on this project. It was, as a strategic communications agency, we work across a whole lot of different policy areas. So while we have done a bit of work in the energy space previously, this was probably the most intensive way for us to get involved, and it's certainly given us all a whole new appreciation of what's being struggled with in this particular area. So as Marianne said, our role was to come and try to look at how this framework could be translated into a set of exemplar resources that could be used to target some specific groups in the community. And it was really what information do consumers want, how do they want it, and how can we best give it to them. So we used, I don't know why ours is turned green, but this is the exact same framework that we used, and anybody who's been in this space for a while now knows that this is a lovely visual that has been put into a whole lot of different formats through the ECA and PowerShift work. So in the consultations that we went out and did, we met with around 90 people from governments, energy regulators, the energy industry, ombudsman's offices, who were very engaged in this work, advocacy organisations, service providers and consumer support organisations. And we asked them, where do you think the gaps are? So there is an awful lot of information out there that's been developed at different points in time by different organisations, but we wanted to know where are the gaps, so where can we most usefully put the time and resources from this project to pick up, if you like, some of the low-hanging fruit, some of the areas where it's going to be easiest to get an impact, and also where there are real challenges in reaching the end consumer to get this information to them. So we also looked at how to take the framework that Aisel Allen had developed and to operationalise it and make it easy for policymakers. And I'll get to that at the end. We worked quite a lot with Ginny and her team on how to develop this framework into something that policymakers can use in their day-to-day lives. So, sorry, I'll just go back to this one. So the four different household types that we chose out of this were low-income households, older people, remote Indigenous communities, and then renters, again as a subset across quite a few of those. And to address that issue of going to organisations that consumers felt were the trusted sources, we actually picked from the consultation process these four different community organisations to work with, so that when we're developing up the actual resources, we're developing it with people who are in day-to-day contact with consumers in each of these areas. So these are the four organisations that we went to: Financial Counselling Australia, a number of the tenant advice services who collectively make up NATO. Wouldn't you love to work for NATO? ICAM, which is the Indigenous Consumer Assistance Network based up in far north Queensland, but who are now working in Indigenous communities around Australia, and the Council of the Ageing, which is, again, a national organisation. We worked mostly with New South Wales and Victoria branches of CODA. So the first one is the resources for low-income households. What we developed there was a range of brochures. Again, people might say there's a million different brochures out there, but the idea with this is to, both through the trusted source, which in this case was the Financial Counselling Australia and the National Debt Helpline, which is their consumer-facing wing, is to co-brand, develop these materials and co-brand them with the organisation, so that people who are already going to and seeking advice from that organisation for other reasons would then pick up this material, which is specifically about energy issues. In this case, we came up with 3 different areas, which was about taking control of your energy bills, simple steps to save on your energy bills. And then another tool that we developed was a toolkit for people working in the front line in financial counselling services across the country, so that I guess you're educating the frontline worker who can then pass on that information to the end consumer. And one of the real gaps that we also found was that it resulted in the development of this Energy Savers kit. Lovely little bag, little tote bag that everybody has these days, but that contains a number of things in it which workers are able to immediately engage with clients on. So things like a thermometer to use, very low-tech thermometer. We did look at the digital ones and decided let's go low-tech. Couple of energy-saving light bulbs. Again, not that expensive, but helping to give that understanding of a very immediate and practical step you could take to become more energy efficient. The old draft sealer, everyone can get one of these at Bunnings, but also to explain what you can do with that in terms of making your property, which is more likely to be a rental property, either a private rental or a social housing property, more energy efficient. Where are we going here? The old draft stopper or door snake. Again, is an example of what you can do to make an otherwise fairly inefficient space slightly more energy efficient. And then there was a flyer that went with it so that you could explain what all those different items are, how they can be used, and where else you can go to get more information about being energy efficient. So there's about 1,200 of these kits that have been sent out through financial counselling services jurisdictions. And then we also did, I'll talk in a minute about the work we did in Indigenous remote communities. So that same kit was, I guess, indigenised. We put a different brochure in there and a few different things to make it suitable for people in remote communities. So in terms of the actual materials, easy English, not too fancy. I mean, these brochures are nice, but we didn't want them to look too fancy, but be particularly engaging and about people and their actions, not just about numbers, watts, dollars and cents. The next group that we worked with were renters, and as we heard about before, they have a lot more limited choices in a number of areas because of their inability to make changes to the building envelope. I think there's also been a bit of a myth in the past that renting is a short-term thing and you'll get through it and you'll end up in home ownership. We now know that renting is actually a lifelong, don't know if choice is the right word, but it's a lifelong reality for a lot more people, and that there are other limitations to what you can do. So we chose, renters are a very broad group. We actually chose to focus on younger renters and first-time renters, figuring that if you get in early and you try and educate them about energy choices and energy issues early in their renting journey, hopefully that will flow through into the rest of their housing experiences. So we developed a number of videos which were young people and renters talking to their audience of renters. So it's very much that peer-to-peer sort of model of communication. How to get a better deal from their energy provider, how to buy more efficient appliances, and how to get the whole house on board, which goes back to that point that particularly in a shared household or in other sorts of rental households, it's not necessarily just the account holder who is making decisions which affect your energy use and your energy bill. We also developed a couple of resources. This is a 4-page booklet for first-time renters. That's very much focused at the university or school leaver market, trying to make it a bit hip and funky so that people will pick it up and realise that it's about your lifestyle. It's not about always just a bill. And then these top 5 tips. So again, it's just a single brochure. Looks like the sort of, it's your fridge. Don't think you can quite see it there, but it's designed to look like a fridge, and then some tips on the fridge. Very simple messages, not engaging in a very short and visual way with renters. And going back to Marianne's framework, I guess what we found here too is that you can have everyone from a real enthusiast right through to very hard to help, throughout the renting community. So you need to be able to engage with people on all those different levels. The other thing that will go with this is a digital campaign, because again, we know with this target group, they're much more likely to be engaged on social media and to get the messages out there through those means. The third group is the older people, and this is where we partnered with COTA. We had a lot of interaction with a number of the different COTA officers about what would work best for their audience. And one of the interesting resources we developed here was a Train the Trainer module, which was to train people who are having face-to-face interactions with older people on a whole range of other issues. It could be housing, it could be budgeting, it could be other sort of lifestyle choices, but training those frontline workers about what they could pass on in terms of energy use and energy hardship. 3 brochures that we developed were very much based on being a peer-to-peer sort of information transfer, and one of them was a conversation starter. So giving people in that community a level of knowledge about energy efficiency and energy use, and then how they can then use that to talk to their peers, because we very much found that older people wanting to learn through that peer-to-peer communication. Some of them are going to be digital, but largely peer-to-peer is where they prefer to get their information from, and again, where they trust their information. I guess in that group too, in terms of the cohorts, very much a group who are on often low but also fixed incomes, so they have very high motivation to do something about their energy bills, but not always the ability or the opportunity to do so. And then the final group is resources for remote Indigenous households, where we partnered with ICANN. And again, we spent a lot of time talking to them about the sort of information that their client group want in this space, but also how they like to receive it. And it was very much about, again, peer-to-peer communication. This program that ICANN have been running for a number of years now, called Yarning Money, is basically where they go out into communities and they talk, starting with very gentle conversations, not straight into budgeting, but the purpose of it is to talk about finances and some of those issues that often don't get spoken about publicly for fear of shame or stigma about them. And we use that Yarning Money model to develop this resource called Yarning Energy. So it's about how they can start talking about energy issues, energy choices, some of the opportunities they have. I guess the issue that we really found, particularly in the remote communities, is that they have a lot less choices. So they're very constrained in the areas that they can actually take action. And so where they don't, for example, have a choice of providers up in far north Queensland, that literally takes an entire set of choices out of their hands, and they have to focus on some of the other ones. So yeah, we just developed a number of resources, brochures, very simple, easy English, very visual again, and trying to incorporate some of the local communities' artwork where we could. And then to the final resource, which is this guide for policymakers. I know, Ginny, we had many conversations about this, going back and forth, about how to turn the framework and all of the resources that Marianne and her team had developed into something that would make some sense for policymakers to use. And I think we got down to a reasonably small size document here, which talks about how you can turn that framework, which was the 6 by 9 by, I think, 23. I hadn't worked that one out. I think we worked out the 6 by 9 by 5 permutations and combinations is a lot to get your head around. So the idea is about how to simplify that into a way that policymakers can engage with and then work through. One of the things that we really were keen to do was to turn it into a digital resource, which would be a searchable online database. But as Marianne pointed out, one of the limitations we had was that the stock take was at a point in time, and unfortunately there hadn't been any resources to keep that updated. So, I mean, one of the things maybe going down the track that would be good to see is some sort of database that could be searchable so that people could find exactly where there are examples in each of these solutions for each of these different permutations and combinations that we're looking at through the framework. So, and in terms of Marianne's framework here, I think we agreed that pretty much all policymakers are enthusiasts when it comes to energy issues. They're very keen, they've got the motivation, the ability and the opportunity. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't always have those things at their disposal, but I would recommend people to have a look at that if you have an opportunity. And one day we'll get the political will behind it to make that something that can be used in all different policy making positions. Thank you.